our Autumn Assembly 2022. The first one actually back in person here at Elliott House since January 2020. Back then, Boris Johnson had just become Prime Minister, and who would have anticipated what the intervening 2 to 3 years would have been like? Not very much has happened, has it? Back then, we looked at what the then new government would have as its priorities, and here we are today, finding ourselves in the very same position. We'll be looking at what our latest new government will be prioritising with help of our guests, Emma Carter-Candola and Chris Peacock from Lexington Communications. Plus, we'll be having a look ahead at next week's autumn statement, courtesy of our very own Chris Fletcher. Back in 2020, we were also looking at bus, and I have to say it, Chris, buzz, franchising, clean air zones, and rail issues, also on today's agenda. There are, however, some significant new issues to review and discuss, including the very important work that the Chamber is leading on around the development of the local skills improvement plan. Plus, we'll give an update of our innovation and connectivity for growth campaign. It's great to have you all back here today. Welcome. Welcome also to those people who are watching and participating via our live stream on the Chamber's YouTube channel. This is really multimedia. In fact, I've not done one of these, not done an autumn one in my presidency. So normally I'd be sat at home with all my papers around me with my camera in front of me. So this is a new multimedia experience. That's why I'm hanging on to this thing, because this is the slightest bit of comfort that I have from the last couple of years doing it online. Yeah. So as I say, welcome to all those on YouTube. And please use the chat facility to make any points, comments, or pose any questions, and we'll get through as many of them as we can. So without further delay, I'd like to ask Emma and Chris from Lexington to give us their thoughts on what lies ahead for and from our government for us.
Hi, good morning, everybody. So I'm Emily Carter-Candola. Thank you for the introduction. And we're from Lexington Communications. So we're going to provide a bit of a political briefing for you this morning, which is no easy task at the moment. And this is my colleague.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chris. I'm the director at Lexington. We'll try and give you a bit of an overview of what's been happening recently. There's a lot, and we've only got 20 minutes, so we'll do our best to go through it all. But most importantly, we're here to answer your questions if you've got any at the end, particularly on what's been going on in terms of the new Prime Minister that we now have, or the next new Prime Minister we've got. We've got a little bit of coverage of the autumn statements as well, what we're hearing from our political contacts down in Westminster. And then also we're having a little bit of a future look ahead to what could be a Labour government when the next general election takes place as well. And again, we've got some details on that further. So I'll pass back to Emily to start us off.
Thank you. So we'll do a bit of an introduction so you can find out a bit more about Lexington, the current government, as Chris says, the reshuffle of people and policies that's happened in the last month or so, and that look ahead, and also looking at what a Labour government might mean for Greater Manchester and the country as a whole.
Fab. So quick introduction about Lexington for you, because I suspect most of you probably won't have heard of us. We are one of the country's leading public affairs agencies and corporate communications agencies. We are focused on delivering change for our clients and for the communities that we work in. One of our strongest mantras is about shaping tomorrow. That is how we talk about the work that we do. And our mantra is very much driven by the fact that we want to help our clients to understand the political landscape in which they're working in, but also help shape that political landscape. Coming from the north of England myself, I was always frustrated in politics that a lot of businesses in the north of England always felt that we just worked to the regulatory framework we were given by Westminster, and not enough were really shaping that conversation. So one of the things that we really focused on doing is helping our clients and businesses we work with to be able to really influence what's happening down in Westminster, both from up here. And you can see there, those are some of the clients we work with, both at a local, regional and national level. So part of our mantra is also built within our wider family of corporate businesses that we work with. We're part of the Q Collective, which is a coming together of a number of creative agencies, all focused in wanting to drive forward change in their areas and communities. So we work with a number of agencies we work with quite closely across the globe, all who are all focused on delivering that shape tomorrow message, really. And one of the things that we're very proud of is that we're very careful about the companies that we work with within this partnership. They've been carefully curated to make sure they all share the mantra that we have too. So just a little bit about what we do, because I always get asked, what is public affairs and what do you do? Most people ask me, oh, do you help politicians get elected? Far from it. What we do is government relations and political engagement. So that is firstly helping our clients understand what's going on in politics and how it can affect them, and then helping them to have those conversations with those influencers, whether it is a parish council all the way up to the Prime Minister. We cover all levels at local, regional and national level. The other work that we do as well also helps around consultation. A lot of our clients require support in terms of consulting on either projects they're working on or wanting to change systems and services that they're delivering to their customers or to residents. So whether you're looking to get a 2-bed extension on the side of your house, all the way through to changing how you deliver services for national utility companies or even local authorities, we're able to help with doing that consultation. And we also do media digital campaigns. We also do responsible business, and similarly the whole variety of corporate comms as well we cover. So I'm going to pass back over to Emily now, who's going to talk a little bit more about the current governance.
Thank you. So I've got the easy task of trying to give you an update on the current government. Obviously, we've had quite a bit of change in the last couple of months. Where do we begin? So following a summer-long leadership election, and obviously Liz Truss winning the vote of the Conservative membership, but only lasting in post for 50 days before resigning. So that's a quick summary of where we're up to now with Rishi Sunak as our Prime Minister. So he's inherited unprecedented economic challenges, which I'm sure you're all very aware of. And that covers the whole of the UK and is more of a global problem as well. And that's as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Brexit, the energy crisis, the list goes on, and the financial market reaction to the not-so-mini budget. So what have we seen since Rishi Sunak has come into post? What we are seeing is a return to the manifesto promises of 2019. He's referring to it in Prime Minister's questions, and we are seeing a return to those promises to try and deliver them ahead of the next general election. He's also inherited huge divisions within the party, and his curating of his cabinet was an attempt to bring the party back together, but it's no easy task. Especially with Sunak being one of the key resignations that brought down Boris Johnson's government as well. He's also got Brexiteers that are unhappy, and obviously we've got the Red Wall Conservatives who are looking ahead to the next general election and not seeing a great amount of delivery on those promises from 2019. And industrial action, which I'm sure we're all seeing the effects of on rail. Obviously, we've had huge strikes on the Manchester to London, and obviously Avanti West Coast having huge problems on that line as well. And for the first time, nurses are looking at striking over their pay. And that is the first time that's ever happened. So industrial action is something that's really proving a problem, and this is all related to the wages in terms of the cost of living and the cost of living crisis affecting all sectors and all varieties of jobs. So winning a next general election is also no easy task, and we're seeing polling showing that it will be a Labour government as it stands now, and they are the Conservative government are looking at how they can minimise the impact of losing the next general election. That was the mood at Conservative Party conference, And we have seen a kind of upturn in the polling, but it's nowhere near looking like a Conservative government at the moment. So the reshuffle of people and policies. Now, there's been a great deal of U-turning and change since Liz Truss left office. Brexit seems to be one of the problems that has fallen down the priority list as a result of the economic challenges. But we do expect that to return to the top of the pile following the autumn statement next week. The cabinet was cleared out. Rishi Sunak took out 11 ministers from the cabinet and reappointed a lot of his supporters from the summer leadership election. And there were some problems with those appointments as well. Suella Braverman back to the Home Office has been a huge one. That has thrown his kind of integrity into question. And also Gavin Williamson, who has now resigned from his post, but again, threw his integrity into question due to the allegations around bullying. So his reshuffle has not gone without its problems and the policies as well. So essentially, the majority of the policies that Liz Truss tried to implement have been undone, apart from the ones that were already in legislation. Some of those being around levelling up. Investment zones is one that keeps being thrown around as to whether they're actually going to deliver that. And everything is kind of on the table in the autumn statement because we are now looking at, a huge financial black hole. There has been a shift. Obviously, Michael Gove has returned to the Levelling Up and Housing Department, which should see levelling up return to a higher priority. But with the limited time and money the government has until the next general election, it's not yet clear how focused they are on delivering that and how far they can really go. And obviously Greater Manchester being one of the areas that have bid for those investment zones. And then just quickly on Brexit. So this government is gradually becoming more pragmatic on a deal to sort the Northern Ireland Protocol. Rishi Sunak is a lot more trusted than Liz Truss and Boris Johnson were. So we are seeing that we're a lot closer to a workable deal being delivered. But as the leadership campaign showed, Rishi Sunak is going to have to try and take the party with him, and he can't be seen to totally sell out on Brexit. And those divisions within the party will cause problems. Now, I'm sure you're aware that long-term EU trade volumes are down, and that seems to be a trend that will persist with the recession and the economic situation. And that will be part of the assumptions that the OBR takes for the outlook on the 17th as well. One thing to keep an eye on is Macron's European community idea as a way of further integrating outside of the formal EU structures that were in place before we left the European Union. But with no election happening until April now in Northern Ireland, it's yet to be seen how this will all play out. And again, we're all sort of waiting for that autumn statement to be out of the way on the 17th, and then we're going to see some action, hopefully, from the government, but I can't promise that. So I'll hand over to Chris now to just talk about the autumn statement.
Thanks, Emily. As she mentioned, the comment on the autumn statement is everything's on the cards, and that's part of the problem that we have right now in terms of predicting what's likely to happen. If you've opened a paper in the last 2 weeks, you'll probably have seen within the first 5 pages a suggestion of what could happen. That's been a very deliberate tactic of the Rishi Sunak government to float ideas into the national press to see what kind of reactions they're getting. A stark contrast to what Liz Truss did as Prime Minister, where she simply announced everything and waited for the feedback afterwards. But that rides into what to expect. So what we've got here, I know Chris has probably got some thoughts as well in terms of what we're likely to see. So it is very varied, and it's pretty much, no one can say anything in set in stone as yet, I don't believe. But there's a few things to look out for. The first really is just to note that the close working relationship between number 10 and number 11. Jeremy Hunt was probably the only minister when Rishi Sunak came in that was safe, who couldn't have been moved because they needed that stability. And so the work that he's been doing since he became Chancellor has been ongoing. I doubt there's been much change in terms of what his planning is and what his thoughts are in terms of next steps. And Rishi Sunak is working really closely with him and the Treasury to deliver that. And the Treasury certainly has found a lot more strength in being able to decide on what's going to be presented on the 17th. We know about the 50 billion financial black hole that needs filling. It's going to be very difficult for the Chancellor to be able to fill that with any degree of exciting positivity. We are hearing the rumours more and more about tax rises in certain areas, whether it's around corporation tax, council tax, capital gains tax. Again, all of these are being floated at the moment to see what type of reaction the markets and the press and the public have to all of these suggestions. So it's one of those where we're going to have to sit tight and watch to see what happens next on the 17th. We are aware cuts are coming. All of the special advisors and political contacts that we have in Westminster have told us this is going to be an uncomfortable event. This isn't going to be about giveaways. It's not going to be an exciting, happy budget where everyone can come away with it going, oh, this is exciting, isn't it? So we are aware that cuts are on the way, but where those are coming, we don't know. And this is a difficulty for Rishi Sunak and for the Conservative Party and the government, because they have made very bold promises around spending, particularly around defence cuts. We know a number of Conservative MPs will quite happily rebel if the benefits don't go up in line with inflation. There are a lot of challenges ahead for the government to decide where those cuts are going to fall. So if I was a betting man, I'd probably look at capital spending as something the government will look at. And that's obviously a big risk for us in the north of England around things like Northern Powerhouse Rail, HS2 and others. Capital spending is an easy one for government to be able to either pull back on, or perhaps there will be a delay and they will simply say that we are pushing ahead with our plans to do this. However, in the current financial circumstances, we're going to give it a little bit more time, wait for the economy to improve again. None of which will obviously be helpful for us in terms of when to grow the Greater Manchester and the whole economy in the north of England as well. And that leads to the concern of, do we get austerity 2.0? And again, another huge challenge for the Conservatives. There are a number of Conservative MPs who will simply not accept the concept of austerity. Even those whom are uber Boris Johnson supporters have said, we got elected in 2019 on the promise of not doing austerity. So the challenges that Emily has already mentioned are laid very bare at the moment. So the 17th could either be a unifying opportunity for Rishi Sunak to bring his party together, or it could just yet be another to try and describe it, just another example of the government falling apart because they can't control the parliamentary party. So thinking on that in terms of what comes next, looking even further ahead, we don't think that Rishi Sunak will call an election until the very last minute. Now we've got rid of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. It is the behest of the Prime Minister to decide when a general election takes place. The latest he can do that is, I believe, January in 2025, but most people would expect it probably December time. Everyone loves a Christmas general election, particularly those of us who work in politics. So we're looking at now, what does that mean? The polling at the moment is very strong for the Labour Party, and all bets are that they will form the next government in some way. I think those of us who work in politics expect the polling to contract a bit over the coming months. Perhaps Rishi Sunak hasn't had the new leader boost that we expected him to get. There is still quite a gap, but everything is about Labour now in terms of planning it, and we're seeing it particularly from a lot of our clients who are saying, okay, I don't want to be speaking to Conservative ministers and Conservative fads, I want to speak to the Labour ones, because in 2 years, if they're going to be forming the next government, I want my policy, the things that I care about, on the front of their agenda. So that's something we're doing a lot of at the moment, and certainly one of the takeaways I'd say to all of you today is, if there is things that you are focused on at your businesses or sectors that you work in, and you feel we need to get ahead of the game on that, now's the time to be speaking to people like ourselves and others about how can we shape what Labour is currently doing, because that is what they're currently doing. I'll come on to that in a second in terms of the team that Keir Starmer's building together. So in terms of Labour, Keir Starmer's had to repeatedly now change his tactics in terms of challenging the Conservatives because of the constant changing of leader. He doesn't have a single message other than we've had 12 years of the same, and you're all the same. But each leader provides their own different challenges, and he's had to amend that quite quickly. And so far, as a former Labour councillor myself from Greater Manchester and still a party member, I think he's doing quite well at that, actually. Emily might say slightly differently because she's from the other side. But I think he's doing okay. I think the biggest challenge for him, though, is that resetting of narrative. Is the lead the Labour has now has not been a result of proactive activity by the Labour Party. It has been because of the implosion of the Conservatives and the Conservative government. That's a huge risk for him coming up to an election, because if, and these are huge ifs, if the economy doesn't go into as long a recession as we're expecting, if there could be an economic upturn towards the back end of these next 2 years in the lead up to that general election, the Labour Party will not be able to rely on the activity of the Conservatives to get them into government. They're going to have to come forward with a bold vision for the country, which they are able to stand up to at a general election. So that's a big challenge for him in terms of the leadership change and how he needs to approach it. I've mentioned about the polls. He's, at the moment, even the options around Keir Starmer being Prime Minister, he's leading on those fronts as well. I think that is to do more with how Keir Starmer presents himself. I think the country at the moment is looking for just some stability, some sense of someone who's in charge and knows what they're doing. And I think that's where Keir is doing quite well in terms of polling as future Prime Minister. Who would you like to be as Prime Minister? And I think we'll just see more of that. I don't think Keir Starmer attracts a lot of votes and support around his charisma. But what he does do is tries to play with a very straight bat. He tries to have the grown-up conversation. And so far, that's working. But as I said, there's a lot of challenges ahead on that front. So in readiness for the general election, and this is a real demonstration of the change in the Labour Party's mood internally, is they've shaken up their top team internally. There's a lot of changes going on in terms of who's leading campaigning, who's leading policy generation. A lot's going on. That's always the sign of a party on election footing and getting ready for an election. The mood in the Labour Party is buoyant around polling and the reaction they're having on doorsteps, but they are not taking it for granted. Every Labour minister and shadow secretary of state I've met with in the last few weeks have all said the same thing, and they've been very stoic about it. We're taking nothing for granted. We need to keep fighting. We do not know we're going to win the next election. That's why we need to keep working hard. And it's quite an interesting conversation that they're having with Labour activists, particularly here in Greater Manchester, because you can attend some events where Labour activists are almost like giddy with excitement about the idea of a Labour government. And then you've got shadow secretaries of states like encouraging them to go out to campaign, saying, calm down. There's a lot of work we need to do. There's a long way to go yet. So there's a very, I'd almost say it, professional approach to how Labour are looking at the next election, which I can't say has always been there. And I think one example of that, which is going to be really interesting for us in here in Greater Manchester to see, is the by-election that's going to be happening in Stretford and Urmston, following the very sudden announcement that Bev Hughes is stepping down as Deputy Mayor and lead for police and crime for Greater Manchester, which then led to Kate Green taking up the role, who was the MP for Stretford and Urmston, which has now led to a by-election, which will mean, Andrew Weston, who's the leader of Trafford, because he's Labour Party's candidate, he will then be standing in the by-election for Stretford and Urmston, which will then lead to a new leader in Trafford as well. Sorry, there's a lot going on at the moment, not just in the Conservative Party government. It's also busy here too politically. And that's all going to be interesting from an election perspective, because Andrew Weston will win. He will be the next MP for Stretford and Urmston. But what will be important from a national perspective to see how Labour does, how strong Labour pulls that result through. There's also a big challenge there in terms of Greater Manchester, in terms of politics. Andrew Weston, those of you who know him, is a formidable figure at the Combined Authority. Very strong, very well connected, and has a very strong portfolio. Him moving from Greater Manchester to Westminster, personally for me, I think will be a great loss to Greater Manchester in terms of the Combined Authority. But then it creates a vacuum in terms of who comes in next, in terms of the next leader of Trafford and how that works at the Combined Authority level. So, as I was saying, the party is very much on election footing now. They are selecting candidates up and down the country, except here in the Northwest, actually, simply because we've got 3 by-elections now planned in the Northwest of England for Westminster. But everywhere, the party is very, very focused on that. So, on that, thank you very much for listening to us. I hope that was some helpful insight for you, and we're happy to take any questions. Oh, God, there's a few. Okay.
Emily and Chris, thanks very much. So I'll go first to Chris.
It's interesting that there's one thing you've not mentioned at all, which in the past would have been a massive headline every day of the week, which is the pound, which is, unbelievably, now we had a dip once before in the 80s, but now it looks like 113, 115 is where it's going to remain for a long time. And that with dire consequences for the economy. And that was predictable. When Liz Truss was making their claim to be a leader, at the time I thought, well, the pound's going to go down the tube. But the other thing about what you're saying about the next election and about Labour's problems, if you go back to 1992 and Black Wednesday, by the time 1997 came around, Ken Clarke had actually got the economy doing very well, but they still got slaughtered. And if you look at what we've got, we didn't have any food banks or heat banks, and we didn't have people on the kind of levels of pay they're on now. So I do think that the Tories have got a big, massive job if they're going to turn things around. I wouldn't bet on it.
Yeah.
But I'm a member of the Labour Party, and I'm very much a right-wing member of the Labour Party, with some doubts about Keir Starmer, which is a nice man. Making Brexit work is one of them.
No, absolutely.
Particularly.
Yeah, I mean, so your point on the pound, the fiscal situation that we find ourselves in, I think from a political perspective, everyone's got their head in their hands around what's happening. For the Labour Party, particularly given the last decade or so, where particularly I remember 2008 and 2009, when Conservatives were destroying the Labour Party's messaging because they were responsible for a global financial crash. And and the Conservatives were exceptionally good at that messaging because historically and in the subconscious of the nation, the Conservatives are good with money. And I think your point around Black Wednesday and the 90s, there is a very similar repeating history with this, that once the Conservatives lose that mantra that we are the ones who are good with the money, that suddenly all bets are off really in terms of that. And I think in terms of the expectation of a Labour government, I think most of us expect it from the polling, from everything that's being said and the difficulty the Conservatives will have to turn this round. I think for Keir Starmer and others, there are a nervousness that people will just get a bit like 1992, that it's going to be fine, we'll just be able to walk this, and something goes wrong. There's a long way to go yet, so I think there's just a steadiness on that. On Keir as well, I think up until the crises that engulfed Boris Johnson's government, I think there was many of us who were thinking there would be a leadership challenge for Keir at some point in the near future. I think that has fundamentally changed now. I don't think anybody is thinking about that. One of the takes from the Labour Party conference that we attended was how unifying Labour Party was at conference. Labour Party conferences for the last 10, 15 years have been embedded with fighting, sometimes quite literally, about the different wings of the party, people being always unhappy and wanting to complain about something. This year, it was a completely different thing. It was everyone was working together. Everyone was focused on wanting to achieve the end goal of a Labour government. When the Labour Party is pulling together in the same direction, it can be a formidable force. But it's not been like that for a very long time. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I was just going to add, just in terms of the Labour front bench and Keir Starmer, what we are hearing is that is the top team that are going to lead them into the next general election, which in some senses we've talked about, they're on that election footing and presents an opportunity for businesses to engage with the party to inform that policy, and given the predictions that will be the next government, and so there is a real opportunity for engagement now.
Thank you, Robin. The economic context that a new Labour Party might come to power in is going to be very similar. Okay, there is still going to be a fiscal black hole to fill. So in terms of the impact here in Greater Manchester and the wider Northwest, on levelling up or on the infrastructure projects that we talked about earlier, do you think the Labour Party will do any different? or will they still shortchange us?
I think, yeah, I think I'm envisaging a Tony Blair, Gordon Brown kind of announcement when it comes to election time to say we will stick with the Conservatives' fiscal plan for the first 12 months, because that's what they did in 1997 when they were elected. They said, look, you can trust us on the economy because actually we're going to stick. We're not going to do anything too radical. We're going to be sensible. I think we can see that. There are a few members of the shadow cabinet at the moment who are dropping in little truth bombs, as it were, into the conversations they're having. And I'd point to Wes Streeting as an example of this, who, when talking about the NHS, he's being very frank to say, we cannot fund the NHS entirely by taxation. We need to have a look at how we can deliver the NHS that we all love and want to have. And that's a massive change in how the Labour Party is approaching these conversations now. So I think that, in terms of the question you've asked, I think they will probably need to stick to very tight fiscal discipline. I don't think they will do anything too outlandish, but what they will be looking to do is having that a 5-year plan for that term of Parliament. How can we help improve the economy enough so that those investments can happen, so we can change how things are being done. I think in terms of capital projects, I think that's something they will look to. The Labour Party has been very strong about borrowing to invest. So I can see where they see there is an investment opportunity, particularly through development, through infrastructure. I think they could push those further forward. I think there is a hesitance in the Conservative Party at the moment. I mean, Emily can pick this up a little bit, about certain investment projects are not popular with the Tory grassroots at all, particularly HS2, particularly house building. They don't like it. Whereas Labour, I think, are far more pragmatic and far more energised to be able to do that.
Sorry, shall we get one more question?
No, it's right.
Good morning. Just turning from the longer term and Labour to the shorter term and the Tories, and the importance of credibility and stability for everybody in business. I mean, do you think Suella Braverman has seen off the attacks, or are we going to, have more uncertainty about who's in the cabinet and who's not?
That's a hard one. What we are seeing is the beginning of stability, and aside from Suella Braverman and Gavin Williamson, what we are seeing is a really strong top team. He has tried to bring the party together. He has got people from different factions, different divisions, and they are very focused on keeping it a stable cabinet team that will deliver until the next general election. So as it stands now, yes, I would like to say that is a stable top team and it will continue until the next general election. Whether the autumn statement proves differently and that delivers greater challenges across all the different sectors is yet to be seen, but touch wood, that is the team that will take us to the next general election.
I think in terms of the Suella question, I would say from a Labour perspective, they will not give up on any member of Rishi Sunak's team whom they believe they can dislodge from their position, because it makes him look weaker and weaker. And I think we saw that with Gavin Williamson, where he initially, and with Suella Braverman actually, stands firmly behind them, but the weight of that just eventually topples. My gut on Suella is I think she's actually benefiting from a certain person being on a TV show at the moment, because it's completely distracting. I think she also benefited from Gavin Williamson's situation. The eyes have fallen away from her for a brief period, and I think that might actually be enough to keep her in place for the moment. But don't be surprised if more things happen over the next couple of months, year or so. I think there will be a target on every Conservative's back at the moment. Any slip up, the Labour will be ready and mobilised to go. What happened?
This is becoming a party political speech now, isn't it?
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm going to have to catch. Go on, one sentence.
He loses the ERG group, does he not?
Which is what is that?
Thanks, Chris. Right. Emily, Chris, thanks very much indeed for that. Round of applause for that. It was really, really great session. Great. Thanks for sharing. So I'm going to hand over to Chris now to take us through what Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce is doing with regard to skills development in the North West, skills challenges and skills development in the North West. take us through LSIP. Chris.
Thanks, Robin, and thank you, Chris and Emily, for that quite lively discussion. I'm sure we could have been still here at noon, probably talking about that one. But politics is very interesting yet again. Okay, right. I'm going to move on now and onto a piece of work that's is dominating myself, Subras, and a number of staff's time here at present. It's around the Greater Manchester Local Skills Improvement Plan, or the LSIP. Hopefully you'll have received some information from us over the last couple of months around this, and obviously taken part in the surveys, etc. And I know there's a couple of people here today that we've had further discussions with around elements of it. A little bit of background to it. On the 1st of August, following a bid that we put in way back in May, we were confirmed by government as the designated employer representative body, or ERB, to deliver the LSIP for Greater Manchester. There are 38 LSIPs throughout England, not the devolved regions, just in England. There are 38, and we've got the duty to design, develop and deliver the one for Greater Manchester. There's an element of statutory involvement in this through the Skills and Post-16 Education Act that came in April this year, and in that there are statutory duties that if you are a college, for example, delivering FE courses, you've got to work with the LSIP in your particular area. So again, it's not just something that's toothless, this has got some bite behind it as well from government level. We are accountable to the Secretary of State for Education, that's currently Gillian Keegan. She's actually the 5th incumbent in that position since we started on this in May. Now, of course, you've got some very short-lived Secretary of State for Education in that time, but that is a problem because you've got a lot of churn going on in quite important areas and positions in government. Hopefully, she will stay around a little bit longer. And to be quite honest, she has got a very, very big interest around FE education. So you've got somebody there in the right position that is really tuned into this as a particular policy. We are developing the plan, and that has to be done by May. But what is the plan, and what is it all about? Basically, the plan is to set out the key priorities and changes needed in a local area to make post-16 technical education or training more responsive and closely aligned to local labour market needs. So in other words, that's going out, speaking to businesses, speaking to employers, finding out what those problems are, why you can't get those staff with the right skills, what are you looking for now, what are you looking for in the future. Beginning to pull all that information together, collect the data that sits around it, and then obviously we've got to play in the providers, the local authorities, to make sure that what businesses want can be matched by what can be provided by the training providers, colleges, independent providers, or whoever. We're doing it local areas first and then aggregating upwards. We get an awful lot of stuff at a GM level, so we know we need 3,000 steel erectors throughout Greater Manchester or whatever it is. Well, that's great, but how do you plan that provision if you're not entirely certain where those people need to have those jobs? What we're doing and what Subra and the team are doing here is beginning to start at that local labour market level in each of the 10 local authority areas, finding out what that information, what that data is showing, and then we can aggregate it up to that GM level for the plan itself. That also works from the point of view of the local colleges, because obviously that is their immediate market in their area. And obviously they get students in from right across the area, and in some areas even outside Greater Manchester. That's absolutely fine, but at least we know what's going on in those local areas. We've got to have a representative, coherent view from employers of the skills most needed. As I said, we'll work with providers and key stakeholders, and we'll set out actionable priorities. That will form the basis of the Local Skills Improvement Plan itself next May, what those priorities are. It's going to be data-rich, robust evidence, and more importantly, underpinned by ongoing dialogue between employers and providers and linked to activity and the strategy of the combined authority. So this is where it all starts to fit together. And again, the expectation from DFE and what's listed in the Skills and Post-16 Education Act is that this LSIP will form part of future strategies being written for the city region, and it must be accounted for within those strategies. it states it there in black and white. So like I said, this is quite an important piece of work and probably never been done at this scale or level before. We're also going to be looking at the layers above and below FE and post-16. And again, while this is primarily aimed at FE and post-16 technical education, in our mind, you can't just look at that in isolation. You've got to go below that and look at what's happening in the school system. You've got to go above that and say what's happening in higher education and also around upskilling workforces as well. If you ignore that, you're never going to get a complete picture, because that is an important part of what the skills requirements are for business. Timeline and the action plan. Last month and right through to March next year, we're going to be working a lot with employers, surveys, events, setting up sector group meetings. We are working with other business organisations throughout Greater Manchester. So, for example, this week, Pro Manchester put the survey link in a newsletter to their members. I've had conversations with FSB, CBI, CITB, and other business organisations, because this just isn't about chamber members. This has got to be for the wider business community, and also reaching those businesses that aren't a member of any organisation. How do we get in touch with those people? So it's quite important. This month, and again through to March next year, we're going to be really picking up the pace around providers. That's colleges, the Greater Manchester Learning Provider Network. And then January, March, we're going to start to, I call, cross the streams a little bit. So we're going to be getting the employees and providers beginning to operate in that same space. Because it's no use having a group of people over here with views and a group of people over there if you never meet in the middle and try and begin that engagement process. So that's what we're going to be doing. By March next year, we'll have some baseline data that we will then begin to start to write the plan on. But what we're going to be doing is we're not going to stop the activity there. So in other words, it's not a case, this is what the skills situation is in Greater Manchester come March. We're going to carry on those conversations. We're going to carry on having those dialogues. We're going to be carrying on collecting that data, because nothing stops still. It's constantly moving, and we've got to operate in that way. 31st of May 2023, the LSIP, the Greater Manchester, will be sent to DFE for approval. So that will be going up, hitting Gillian Keegan's desk at some stage. That's a big assumption if she's still there, of course. Absolutely. Who knows? We're probably assuming that she may well be. And then July 23, when we get the approval from DFE, right through to March 2025, that will be around the delivery and review of the local plan itself. So in other words, what those priorities are saying, what we need to be doing in Greater Manchester to address those skills shortages, driven by the response of businesses, we'll be responsible then for delivering it and reviewing it right the way through. The idea is eventually these will become 3-year rolling plans. So again, we can't just sit back and go, there you go, job done. We've got to be involved with it right the way through. Activity so far, I'll briefly run through this. So we went live at the start of October with the survey launch, press releases. I've started to pop up at various chamber events we're doing. As I said, we're working with other business groups. The pleasing thing is we're getting an awful lot of people contacting us now saying we're really interested in this, we want to work with you, etc., etc. We've done some work as well, some early stage work through Sharon and the REC as well, over the role that recruiters have got in this, because it's not just about employees and providers. We think the recruitment sector's got quite an interesting play in this as well, because obviously they're trying to place people, and what's the quality of those people that they've got, etc., etc. So we're beginning to cover all bases. I've got a presentation next week with the Greater Manchester College Group principals. Clive and myself held a briefing with Andy Burnham a couple of weeks ago to get his view, make sure he's fully sighted on what's going on. We've got data arrangements in place with the Combined Authority, a bit of work that Subra's doing. We already work very closely with the Skills Observatory, but like I said, we've really got to make sure now that what the data is there is usable. We're setting up sector groups, and we are recruiting staff to help with our research work as well. And we've got 3 of them in here today. I'm just trying to find where there's Samantha, Adia, and Lindsay is there as well. So it's their first assembly. And they've been taken on specifically to work on the data collection and analysis around the LSIP. So we're going to throw these open now. If anybody's got any sort of ideas, feedback, or anything like that, What I want to do is probably follow up afterwards with a few more detailed questions. We asked the team, or Subra asked the team, to come up with some key questions, really, that we could discuss today around some of the issues that are being highlighted at present. And like I said, don't want to put anybody on the spot or anything like that. And like I said, we'll circulate these through after assembly as well to everybody around that. But there's a couple of key things that we're looking at here. One is around skills gaps among current staff. What areas of improvements do you need for your staff? The main skills lacking currently among the employees of your business, and what action are you taking to address the shortage of skills among current employees? And again, if you're looking to recruit, the skills gaps among candidates as well, what's the current situation regarding recruitment? We've got some data from the QES last time that there's quite a bit of recruitment going on at present. And the more recruitment there is, usually the more problems there are. And I think something like 84% of businesses are recruiting full-time staff, if I remember rightly, Subra.
Chris, we got a question from online actually for you.
Oh, right, okay.
So from Warren Bolton.
Yeah.
Morning, this is welcome. Is there any plan to engage with schools?
Yes, there is, Warren. What we've got to do first and foremost is obviously pick up around the FE colleges and the employers bit within that. But as I've said, we can't just ignore what's happening within schools. And I've got a meeting, I can't remember, I've got that many different organisations and things. There's somebody who works specifically with schools via the combined authority that we've got a meeting set up, or will be getting set up in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be taken care of. Thanks, Robin, and thanks, Warren. And again, amongst candidates, name the top 5 skills that you look for and which skills are lacking among candidates. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on any of those at the present moment in time or answer them.
Here we go.
Come on, David.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's just more of an observation, really. Is there any mechanism within this structure to then target FE, students that traditionally have not looked to go into business? Because I think one of the things that quite often happens is it's about giving people the opportunity to learn more about things from communities or regions that wouldn't have actually necessarily thought, I want to go into business, and just there might be I just wonder if that's been considered as part of the plan.
A sort of broader awareness, really, and I guess it's a little bit like advice and guidance, isn't it, really, around, yeah. Yeah, there's a couple of things within that. We've got and again, the colleges are really on with this now. They recognise the importance of this work and want to get more involved with it. If you go and speak to any college principal, there's already quite a bit of sort of engagement with employers actually going on. And again, this isn't designed to replace that. But what we want to do is, where we can enhance that engagement. We can make it a little bit more real as well. And by that, I don't mean it's not working at present. It could work a lot better. But if we know, for example, in, let's pick an area, Bolton or wherever it is, there's a specific greater skills need or priority, that's up to us really then to highlight it and make sure that the businesses are involved in that. And again, it's shattering myths, isn't it? We've had conversations before, haven't we, around people's perceptions on things and why would I go and do that? Because I don't want to do that. I'd sooner go and do that. Yeah, but there's no demand for that job over there. And actually, you can make more money doing that. And it's those levels of conversation we really need to start. And this isn't just around, what they call the frontier sectors, the high-end manufacturing and everything. This is all about the foundational economy as well. Greater Manchester's got a greater dependency on the foundation economy, those basic jobs, than any other area in the country. So we can't ignore that either. And we've got to raise people's aspirations and expectations as well, really. So I think that forms part of this, but we're going to have to play that into it.
Thanks, Chris. Lots of questions, but the one I think is mainly in my head. We've been working with a range of young adults in different parts of Greater Manchester who do display the type of skills that employers are looking for, but don't come from traditional backgrounds. So I'm wondering, as well as the more sort of traditional approaches about how do we skill people up and how do you recruit them, et cetera, is also how do we look at those parts of the population which already have the skills but aren't connected into the right systems? Because what they're telling us is they can't find the right pathways in order to get in. So where I'm based in Salford, we've got the fastest growing economy in the northwest of England, but a divided city. And actually, a lot of young people who could go and fill some of the jobs that employers are saying are difficult to fill, but they're just not connected. They don't have the links. So whilst we might focus on development of skills and qualifications, all the rest of it, which is fine, but the risk I think we've found certainly in somewhere like Salford is that there's very little thought about actually how to connect people in the first place, particularly if you're coming from backgrounds where maybe you're disabled and so on. So we've recently taken on a young autistic man who's got a master's degree and hasn't been able to find a job in 6 years. Nobody would employ him.
Yeah. No, it's totally a valid point, Chris. And again, from some of the work we did around, the neurodiverse, people and things like that, there's a lot of people with these skills that are just being overlooked and whatever. And obviously, we're going to have to try and tackle a way of incorporating some of that work as well. Subra, do you want to? I didn't. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry.
Chris, thanks for the update on what's happening. And my question links a little bit to the previous one. In the 70s, Southwest Airlines in the States introduced the concept of hiring for attitude and training for skill. And I'm not decrying the training for skill bit, but we all know that the needs of businesses are dynamic and shifting and changing. And I just wonder, as part of what you are doing and looking into, whether the attitudinal part of individuals as they come through the education system being business ready, and I don't necessarily mean skilled business ready, more attitudinally business ready, and having already had an awareness of the commercials, of what the working environment's like, having had experience maybe of work placements, whether that preparedness, even if the skill level isn't there, whether that's part of what you're looking into.
It will be, and like I said, it will be, because again it is, and again off the conversations we're having with employees is that bit around, just give me somebody, paraphrasing, give me somebody with the right attitude, I can train the technical bit in them, and that's absolutely fine, and we accept that. There's no two ways about it. What we've got to try and do with this is obviously that we don't end up losing that in amongst, we need this level qualification, that level qualification, this bit, one thing and another. We've got to match the two together, really. So we're bringing along those actual skill qualifications at the right level, both for what's needed now and in the future. But some of that is going back to what Chris said and what David said as well, from the point of view of getting in front of these people to say, you can do this, but you actually need to think about doing it in this particular way. So it is, like I said, it's a huge, great big picture we're doing this. And sometimes that bit there, which sort of gets badged up a little bit like soft skills, is quite difficult to sometimes quantify. But that doesn't mean to say we ignore it. So it's how we do that as part of this, which is absolutely vital. But yeah, it's a good point. And it's the same what you're saying there, it's that bit around, we've got to include everybody in this, because there's some really brilliantly skilled people out there, but from backgrounds you wouldn't normally associate with this particular type of job. Lims is nodding away there, and she's on the research team, so I can see Subra. I think we might need a specific piece of research coming up. Oh, she's shaking her head now, so maybe not. Anyway, but yeah. Yeah.
Mine's not a question; it's just a response to the previous speaker. So on the connections point that you mentioned, what type of interventions do you think would help make those connections? Which also sort of ties in with the point that you made, Chris, about how do we improve the or widen the approach that employers generally take when it comes to recruitment, so that you can touch neurodiversity and not just the traditional definitions of. So I'm more interested in what we can do in terms of any specific suggestions or advice that you might have for us.
Well, one practical example, we did some work up in Colthurst in Oldham for the Royal Oldham Hospital, because they'd identified that they were struggling to recruit people from within that local area, which is rated as having the lowest skills level of any ward anywhere in England. So we went out and asked local people, essentially, and the number one issue that the local people came back with is, come to where we are. Physically come to us. And so one of the things, for example, the hospital has done, instead of holding their jobs fairs and events and so on in the hospital, for example, they moved that event 400 yards to the local mosque. And suddenly the number of people appearing just went up and up and up. And they've drastically increased the number of local people that they employ in that hospital. So some of this, it doesn't need to be highly technical or very difficult. Basically, and we hear this in various places we go to, come to where we are, come and see what we're capable of doing. Look at things like work trials. Maybe don't use interviews, all of that type of thing. Because we know that traditional recruitment processes, particularly if they ask for bits of paper and certain qualifications, which frankly are often unnecessary for a job, get in the way. That traditional recruitment processes actually prevent people from getting work in many cases. And there's lots of other ways that we can identify the skills and strengths of people. But I think there's something about how employers think about what do they ask for. Is it really necessary to have that particular qualification for this particular job? Is it more about values and attitudes, which I absolutely agree with? But can we get better at some of the very basic practicalities of this? Because often they're the practical barriers that get in the way of people just presenting themselves and just proving what they're capable of doing. So I think there's some really sort of 20th century approaches to recruitment which prevent a lot of this stuff happening.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have any practical examples as good as that, but just from my experience, there needs to be a way to give the wider community, be that from where people living, and a bit of research that says, well, why is this group of people, either from their backgrounds or their geographical locations, why are they so underrepresented within the business community compared to others? So there needs to be a mechanism by which there's a way that gives those people an opportunity to apply. That's the key thing, and I think the example you gave there, is a really good example of that in action, really.
Thanks for that.
One more question now from Sharon at the back.
Hi, I'm just going to pick up on what everybody else has said, actually. I've made a load of notes. But I was actually at the Trafford College Group Employer Advisory Board yesterday, and I have to say these questions that you're looking at there are the questions that they were asking. One of the employers, who was a local manufacturer, actually said that what they did was they got 11 students from the college to go and have a look around, have a bit of an open morning. Out of those 11, when they were talking about apprenticeships, 10 applied for an apprenticeship within that organisation. So I think getting them having a look at the work environment, giving them those opportunities are certainly going to make a big difference. I also think that in terms of the things that you'd said, I've written down business ready, attitude, matching skills, values, building confidence, getting in front of people. These are all things that, we have to look at the educational system. We have to look at schools, further educations, universities, and we have to make sure that we've got strong collaboration between business and between the further education establishment. And of course, the Chamber are the conduit for that. And this LSIP programme is really going to benefit it. But I think if we get in front of these people, I'm a recruiter, and what I do is every single candidate that I speak to, because I recruit at management level, I talk to them about the LSIP. I ask them, can they spread the word? And I think we need to be doing that as businesses as well, so that we're getting as much data as we can in order to make sure that our future planning for the education system, for training, for development is as robust as it can be. And it really is in our hands at the moment. And I know I'm probably preaching a little bit there, but I feel quite strongly about it. So I thought I'd throw my pennies worth in. Thank you.
Oh, that's great, Sharon. I wouldn't expect anything less, to be quite honest. It's interesting, though, because we've seen a lot of passion about this already from people. And I'm going to have to draw this to come, but I've got loads more questions up on here. But what I'll do is I'll share that with people afterwards. And please just take some time to respond to it, because it is so important. And the other sort of ask I've got from this as well is we've done a toolkit for Assembly members that I want to share with you as well. So you can share that survey out to people in your supply chain, your networks, your contacts. It's got some, if you're on social media, it's got some social media graphics. It's got some copy as well that you can use. And like I said, these are the type of toolkits that we're sending out to partners and patrons and other key business organisations to get them involved in this. Those of you that know me, I'm sometimes a little bit impatient with things, and I'm having to sort of just rein myself back in a little bit with this, because this, as Subra keeps reminding me, is not a sprint. This is a marathon. We could take some shortcuts if we wanted to. We could actually sort of do a plan before Christmas, but that won't be the right thing to do. We've been entrusted to do this properly. We want to do it properly, and we will do it properly. So, like I said, there's some fantastic ideas, and again, every event we hold, we're getting feedback from people and whatever. It's just developing those ideas even further. So it is, it's something that isn't going to go away. We are going to deliver this, and we'll be holding, more events on this in the future. But like I said, I've got questions on digital skills there, which is quite an important part of this. From DFE, we're getting a real sort of steer on what digital skills are, not just in what you'd say is a traditional digital sector, but what basic computer skills are essential to your organisation. What other digital skills do you need? Net zero green skills, a huge area there that is absolutely fundamental to the strategy in Greater Manchester, becoming net zero by 2038. And again, that is a key part of green skills, and especially that second one there. What occupations are emerging or becoming obsolete through the green economy, because jobs are going to change, and they're changing already, but they were changing at an even more rapid pace over the next few years. We've got Alex in here today, Alex Booth, who took the bull by the horns really, and set up the Greater Manchester Green Scene Network, which will hopefully play a key part in some of that. And again, future workforce as well, because it's all very well to sort of look in the here and now, but we need to be looking 12 months, 3 years, 5 years in advance of this stuff. And that's an interesting question as well. How do you imagine your future workforce compares to the current one?
And on that question, I'm going to rein you in now, Chris.
It's fine, Robin. I need reining in.
No, thanks a lot. Again, great session and great input from people. And I'd also be interested to see how bigger business, the bigger employers in the northwest, in Greater Manchester, can play a role in this as well, and see, maybe we bring a bunch of those together to go through some of these questions.
Yeah.
Collectively in workshop style.
Yeah, definitely.
Great. Right, thanks, Chris. So I wonder if stay where you are, because you're on next as well. If you don't mind. So if you wouldn't mind taking us through our campaign, which is Connectivity and Innovation for Growth.
Yes.
Tell us what's happening there.
Yeah, no, that's fine, Robin. At the last Assembly meeting, it might have been the last but one, we heard around the idea about the Innovation Accelerator, which I think came out of the Levelling Up white paper, which seems an eternity ago. I think it was about March or April when that came out, or February this year. And the idea behind the Innovation Accelerator was that there was basically a pot of money, £100 million, from government that was going to be divided between Greater Manchester, West Midlands, and Glasgow to put into innovation. I spoke to Athy Kershaw, who was part of the presentation team around this yesterday, just to get an update. They've had input now. I think they've got about 22 different schemes from Greater Manchester. The downside of that is all those schemes added up come to about 80 million. And when there's a pot of 100 million between 3 areas, something's got to give. So they're in the middle of doing a final assessment. From a Greater Manchester level, everything is sort of on time. You know, in this world of delays and one thing and another, it's roughly thereabouts on the time scale. The problem is that Treasury haven't signed off yet on how this actually looks and the split of the funding, etc. Now, again, this may come out next week in the autumn statement. They may decide to do a bit of a sort of look what we're doing type announcement and to sort of, you know, put a bit of a sugar coating on what may be a bitter pill. So we're just waiting of that, but there is some really good stuff that's coming through in that, and hopefully early in the new year we'll hear a little bit more about that. We also discussed the idea around the what I call the innovation roadshows, these local events. We've got 3 areas keen to do them: Stockport, Bolton, and Wigan. I'm just working with Stockport Local Authority on that. We're working with the University in Bolton and also Wigan College as well, just trying to get things sorted out. That's probably going to be January time when we get those events up and running. But again, the idea there is to really showcase what's going on. And again, begin to come at this angle from the point of view of, you know, if you're doing business, times are hard, start to think about doing things differently. And we're also always on the case, looking out for examples and case studies that we can use on this piece of work that we're doing. That obviously is quite a major part of the work that Robin's doing. So I'll stop there, Robin. If anybody's got any questions, more than happy to answer them. Apart from if it's about when funding will be approved, because that's anybody's guess at present.
No, thanks, Chris. Thanks for that. Right, so yeah, nothing further to add other than looking forward to the road shows, and hopefully it's going to generate a lot of interest, a lot of connectivity, and bring a lot of innovation. We're already seeing this taking place actually through our relationships with places like Manchester Metropolitan University and their Print City. You know, Sharon did a great post the other day on Twitter and LinkedIn. I'm enthused by what your energy and passion on that, because relaying and what you'd seen and what you'd experienced at Print City, I cannot encourage people enough to get down and see what they're doing. And similar setups also at University of Manchester and Salford. And the great thing actually is that the universities are actually collaborating together to make the best of all of their assets actually. So, and actually just put in a bid for a Centre for Digital Innovation, which links into manufacturing, design, technology, and so I think there's some great collaboration taking place, and you know, hopefully we'll make more and more use of the assets that the city has got within its universities for innovation. But it's about bringing people together, get them connected, get them talking, the serendipitous conversations that lead to things that we all, which is why this is great to be all back together in this room physically. Right, so well, moving on now. Well, we had the mini budget a few weeks ago. But as Chris has said, it's a mini budget with maximum damage. Yeah, so next week we've got the Chancellor's statement. So Chris, back to you to give us an update on what you're anticipating from the autumn statement, but more importantly also that this is going to be a short session to see what you want to get at, what you want to see in it. It'd be interesting with our colleagues in the corner here to see what they're anticipating. Well, we've already had some of what they're anticipating, but it'd be interesting to see what you in the room are anticipating, and also what you're wishing for.
Yeah, just a very, very quick one. Obviously, Emily and Chris gave a really good overview. You know, we can't get away from it. There is a huge black hole in finances. We're fully expecting spending to be cut and taxes to rise in some way, shape, or form. So it's not going to be great news. But there's 3 questions there, and again, you know, if anyone wants to add in what they think, I might come to you, Subra, actually, and just put you a little bit on the spot with this. But what, you know, 2 things, isn't it? What do you want the Chancellor to announce next week? And what do you expect him to announce? There could be some variance within that. And also, as well, if anybody is interested in taking, you know, getting more involved in this, because I'm absolutely convinced we'll get some media inquiries next week on the back of what gets announced on the 17th. They're always looking for business views on things. So if anybody is interested in that, please let us know, and we can share that. Subra, I don't know if you want to give us your thoughts. First day back after a week off, so you know, nothing like being thrown in at the deep end. But so if you've got any thoughts on what you think about this statement.
Okay, thank you. So the one thing that has struck me over the last week is the fact that there is going to be some form of austerity. There has been a lot of pushback from local authorities on that. And if you read the news, I think it was on Sunday last week, there were actually rumors that we could see a significant increase in council tax from the next financial year. And that's going to be extremely damaging because for me, council tax increases are regressive. Every household has to pay it. It is not going to do anything for equality in terms of income and distribution. So that's a big concern that I have, and it would be interesting to see whether that does come to pass. But I've seen Rishi Sunak's time as Chancellor and now as Prime Minister as filled with sort of dropping these ideas prior, as you said, Chris, and then looking for the reaction. So that will not go down very well, I don't think. That's one thing. In terms of the overall kind of fiscal plan, we do expect to see the tax increases which were previously announced by Rishi Sunak as Chancellor probably come back into the agenda. Highly likely there is going to be an increase in the income tax thresholds. So not just the basic rate of income tax, but also the higher level of income tax. The other thing I have heard is a potential decrease in the threshold for the higher rate of income tax. So that's the 45% ban, which obviously, as you know, Liz Truss tried to scrap, but that's not going anywhere. We know that now. But the measures that will stay are obviously the reversals to the national insurance increases. I don't think that's going to come back. But that's at a kind of a macro fiscal level. But particular concern in GM and the wider Northwest is the planned cut, or the rumored cut to the Northern Powerhouse Rail project. And that is, I think, going to be extremely, extremely damaging. And this is the main concern that I have, that even if a different government were to come to power, if they are looking for savings, they're looking for savings in the capital budget, which means big infrastructure projects are out. And so, in 2029, perhaps even with the Labour government in power, we might be still talking about much the same thing. That's a big concern that I have because, it has come to pass that infrastructure and the lack of infrastructure is a major constraint for economic growth here in the Northwest. And so the best thing that any government can do is to completely go away from the Green Book rules on for investment. And even on housing, and I understand the Conservative Party position on housing, but even housing is sometimes based on land value, which is why a lot of investment goes to London in terms of conversion and the funding for converting brownfield land into development land. So, that's a kind of I know I was rambling a bit, but these are what I expect will happen next week. And there will be obviously one kind of rabbit out of the hat as well. We don't know what that will be.
Okay. Just if anybody's got any views immediately on any of that around the autumn statement and any expectations, or like I said, what they expect to see or what they want to see. Again, it's a bit like a Christmas list, isn't it? We can all put something on there, and we've got
I have one question for you. What do you think would be the worst possible outcome from the Chancellor's statement? What do you think could be the worst possible announcement, perhaps? I'm very interested to get your views on that. Yes, Chris. Sorry, Chris.
For me, I think it's the point you were making at the end. If there's a failure to start investing in infrastructure long term, and that's really destructive. And I think one of the other things at a local level for me to keep an eye on is about local government finance. Because there are rumours that potentially half of the local authorities in Greater Manchester could go bust in the next 2 years. And if we don't have functioning local government, that has all sorts of huge knock-on effects around that. So obviously we need to look at Westminster, but not all politics happens in London.
If I might just throw a spanner in the works and speak like a Keynesian economist. We go back to the 30s. The USA got out of the Depression in 1933. We didn't get out of it until the Second World War because we took went down the road of cutting spending. And it seems crazy to me that an investment in the railway line could bring in such a big return. I come from Scarborough, originally from Scarborough. Scarborough is the end of the A64, single carriageway road most of the way. So it's a dump at the end of the 40 miles out. And every time I go, I think if they just made this a 40-minute drive down a dual carriageway, the investment would be amazing. So I don't know how we turn that around, but we've all been browbeaten over the last 40 years into believing that the way to do things is to cut. It's the other way around. Except, one thing I was going to say, don't spook the markets again.
Thanks, Subra. Back to you, Chris, to take us through the brief updates on the SPF and the Clean Air Zone.
No problem. So the Clean Air Zone, it's a little bit like a greatest hits album, this, isn't it? You know, you're just hearing things repeated. If you remember KTEL or whatever it was in the good old days in the Woolies adverts, the Clean Air Zone is still a thing, and we're still waiting of a response from government. Of course, being honest, you know, over the last 3-4 month period over summer, there was literally no sort of effective government, really, to be quite honest, to make those decisions. So we're still waiting in Greater Manchester, we being Greater Manchester, still waiting in Greater Manchester for a reply from the Environment Secretary about whether or not the plan for a non-charging clean air zone in Greater Manchester will be approved. Like I said, we just don't know yet what the inference will be from that. My own personal take on it is that I'd be surprised, bearing in mind the conversation we've just had and previously around the state of finances, that the government's just prepared to say, yeah, that's okay, we won't take charge of people. I think it may come out in some form of very localised charging area, maybe the city centre or whatever it may well be. But I just don't know that. That is a bit of speculation on my part. But the Clean Air Zone is still a live issue. The UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the UK SPF, again, I think we had a presentation on this, maybe not at last December, but the one before it. This is the government's replacement for all the European structural funds, although at a much reduced level, a fraction of what used to come out from the EU. And again, the idea was that that Greater Manchester Combined Authority will be given a pot of money that will then be bid in for by local authorities and various other organisations and then distributed out, looking at places, community, people, skills, etc. We're still sort of waiting to see what that looks like in reality. All the work's been done for the bids to go in, but we're still just waiting for the final sort of nod around the fund itself. So that is still a work in progress. One of the things that has been in my inbox from a number of members is around the current state of the rail network. Everyone's sighing, nodding, shaking their heads and all the rest of it.
Did anybody come in by train today, by the way? Yeah.
At least you had a train though, Chris. I mean, come on, that's something.
Very green though, very green.
Yeah. And I know Callum, who's doing all the tech today, he was running a little bit late as well. And I think he had to do his impression of Usain Bolt coming over from Piccadilly Station. Obviously, rail strikes are still happening, but I think there's a bit more fundamental issue over and above that around the actual train companies themselves. I think one in particular is being a little bit masked at the present moment in time because of what's been going on the West Coast Main Line with Avanti. And that, if anybody follows certain people on Twitter, you'll know what the current state of play is as regards Transpennine Express TPE. The East-West service is just virtually non-existent. I think the Cleethorpes to Liverpool service, I think it is, the other day, had like a 10-hour gap between services because they're just being pulled. That's got nothing to do with strike action. That's just simply lack of staff, lack of trained staff, and just how all that is currently being managed. I've had conversations with the airport as well over TPE and Avanti. It'd be quite interesting now that the sort of impact of strikes may be less than we obviously saw last weekend. Strikes pulled as to what actually happens now as regards levels of service. But this isn't anything new. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a rail plan put for Greater Manchester to reduce the number of services using the Oxford Road corridor, so you can give a better service. So by pulling services, you allegedly get a better service. So this way of thinking isn't something new. It's been around for a number of years, but it just shows the impact of underinvestment and proper management in these. So if anybody's got any feedback on any of that, please let me know, because we're getting requests all the time from people, and the TPE one in particular is sort of one of those ones that's right under the radar screen. But fundamentally, it's a lot worse than what Avanti is currently doing or not doing. So just please be aware of that. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff going on all around as well with all that. But I'll hand back to Robin now. Anybody got any comments on any of those? No. No therapy session on Rail Network or anything like that.
Oh,
Claire.
Right,
Hang on, just wait for the mic, Claire.
There's a comment online as well. Do you want to take that comment online? And
Yeah, so this is from Warren again. For a long time, but nothing seems to have happened. I believe that this is connected to skills, and having mobility in the skills is definitely not.
Okay, so that's Warren from Bolton again. We've got more people online than just Warren, believe me. He's talking about he's talking about the connected transport network, and it's been talked about in Greater Manchester for a long time. It has been talked about in Greater Manchester for a long time, and it's beginning to be rolled out. Certainly from next year, going back to the new bus franchises that will be started in Wigan and Bolton next spring, and by I think the end of 2024, all the bus services in Greater Manchester will come under local authority control, so that'll be run directly through TFGM and ultimately the Mayor's office as well. There are issues with that over the state funding. There's a lot of capital funding available, but the revenue fund, you actually need to continue that service. That's the bit that is not looking as healthy as it once was at present. You've obviously got the rollout of the cycle network and the B-bikes and one thing and another. So these things are always slow to come through, but they are slowly beginning to happen. And you've also got the bit that are around reduced fares as well, whereby it's £2 maximum now for adults, £5 maximum cap fare for a day. Now, that is happening in other areas, but in Greater Manchester, we were sort of first to go into that. But again, some of that is predicated on government funding. So unless people are actually using the service, quickly get taken back as well. So it's about making sure that people are aware and they're actually using it. So it is happening. I mean, at one time they were talking about, local rail control and franchises, but I think that's a long way off now in the future, unfortunately. So it is happening. It is beginning to roll out there, but obviously quite slowly.
You might not know this, but the clean air zone, they've not confirmed that they're not going to charge at the moment. But if there is a charge in place, what are they using the money for to clean the air? Because if everything vehicles still stay on the road and everyone still pays, how's the money cleaning the air?
It's primarily being used, Claire, to actually improve the cleanliness of vehicle that's old and it's emitting a lot of NOx into the atmosphere. Of investment money that you can then use to get in a vehicle, whether that's an EV or a much newer vehicle or whatever it may well be. But the money is being sort of reinvested back into that. So it's sort of hypothecated to top those investment funds up. There's a pot of money available from government, and the original idea was that the charge would, make sure that that's topped up to a really good level over the next few years. Obviously, if it's a non-charging zone and there's no money coming in, what you do with that pot of money that you've got to make the maximum impact. And they've done all sorts of studies. There is an option called sort of do minimum or do nothing option, which in other words is saying, if we don't do anything in Greater Manchester to actively intervene in this, come, I think it's 2026, 2027, you'll be at legal levels of air quality. Now, what the money do is they can get that level a little bit quicker. Okay, so it's not that. It's that investment pot, basically.
Thank you.
Right. Thanks, Chris. So, so if there are no any other business points from anybody, I did have a couple, actually. Just want to make a couple of shameless plugs while we're all together. So, first of all, Greater Manchester Chamber Building of the Year Awards 2022. So, very keen if you see a building that you like and you wanted to get an award, please submit your suggestions there. It's totally open. Get them in quick. I'd like to also make a plug for the Chamber Carol concert, which takes place on the 7th of December at 11:30 at the Cathedral. So expect to see you all there in full voice. Also the Halle are running a fantastic programme over the Christmas period with carol concerts, family carol concerts all the way through, and then into the New Year with some fantastic concerts as well around the New Year, the transition into New Year, some great events there. So yeah, hopefully looking forward to seeing some of you there as well, particularly David. I'm sure you'll be at some of those. Yeah, so finally I'd like to just thank Chris and the team for today, and also for yourselves for participating in this, making the effort to come in on the trains. As we said at the start, this has been the first one in the first autumn statement since COVID in person, or in fact hybrid, and we're getting feedback from the online thing that it's going well. So, and we're coming through as clear as if we were in the room. So that's great. So again, thanks very much for coming. Thanks to our colleagues from Lexington, to Emily and to Chris for coming and joining us and setting off our event today. And there's even a request that you come back on an annual basis as well to do something similar. So that's something to work into our agenda. So look forward to seeing you again this time next year. Yeah. So with that, I'd like to wish everybody a happy Christmas, a Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year, and see you all, in the spring. Thank you. Thanks, Robin. Cheers, thanks, Robin.